Welcome to Organic News with Cat Waters, revealing the truths behind the conspiracy. Every Tuesday from 6 to 8 Eastern.
Thank you for tuning in to this Tuesday, September 29th, here on Organic News on Awake Radio. And we have the first guest is Oliver Tickell from the UK. Let me see. Okay, longtime British member of Parliament. We're going to be talking about Jeremy Corbyn, who won the leadership of the Labour Party with 60% in a field of 4 candidates. And Oliver Tickell, you write for the Ecologist in the UK, your UK-based editor.
That's right.
Well, yeah. So welcome to Organic News. Actually, has a UK. We get broadcast all over the UK.
That's great.
And so thank you for being with us. And so what is it like to have Jeremy Corbyn, who had won the Labour Party?
Well, I think that there's a number of words that have been applied to Jeremy Corbyn. One of the first that turned up was authentic. And since then, we've been hearing about integrity, and we've been hearing about honesty. And I think the word that is now coming out of the Labour Party conference, which is still in progress, but where Corbyn gave his big speech today, is inspiration. And frankly, that's a pretty good load of adjectives to have applied to a politician these days. I think Corbyn is riding very, very high.
We need somebody.
And actually very much against the odds. If you look at how it's been and the opposition that is lined up against him, he is doing very well. And I feel that it is actually changing the national mood and the national conversation. So things are good.
The people must be behind him then.
A lot of people are behind him. He's got his party behind him and the huge numbers of people that have joined his party. And I think, too, just a great many voters who became apathetic, disillusioned, didn't bother to vote, didn't bother to register, who voted for sort of protest parties like the Nationalist Party, UKIP, perhaps a number of people who voted Green as a party that seemed to be offering a more genuinely left-wing radical opposition, a more progressive party. In Scotland, perhaps SNP, which was definitely to the left of Labour in the recent general election. I think that Corbyn's Labour Party will be picking up votes from many different places. Interestingly, in the sort of mainstream political discourse, the question is, will he be able to win over these conservative voters? No, maybe he will be able to win over some conservative voters, but I fundamentally think this is the wrong question, because the votes that Corbyn has to win over, first of all, are the votes that are essentially on his side, but that in the past haven't really bothered. And that is one thing that will not be happening again under Corbyn as Labour Party leader. You know, he is inspiring people, he is filling people with hope and promise, and I cannot help thinking, you know, no matter that, you know, a lot of people are saying, hey, you know, all right, he can win over the Labour Party, but hey, he could never win a general election, could he? He could never be Prime Minister. Well, I would disagree. I think that if we had had Corbyn inspiring and leading the Labour Party before the recent general election that took place in May, instead of Ed Miliband, who was the Labour Party leader, I think Labour would have trounced home, because they would have had that kind of magical element of hope and fervour and optimism that was really completely lacking from the discourse last time around.
And so the conditions in the UK that really, well, because he won with 60%, so that's really well. And he's addressing all of these issues, especially like the environment.
Well, the environment is certainly one of his issues, but I think that you have to see it as being part of a broad progressive agenda. But certainly on the environment, he is absolutely for renewable energy. He is, and he is committed to a green energy future. He is against nuclear power. He's also against nuclear weapons. He wants serious action on climate change. He wants a much greener kind of agriculture, local healthy food. He is looking to knock TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, on the head. He just doesn't want any part of these so-called free trade agreements at all. He is really feeding directly into the progressive agenda on all of these issues. And I think, yes, the environmental aspect is one that is very personal to him. He is himself a cyclist. He cycles into work in the Houses of Parliament from North London, which is not a short bike ride.
Good for him.
He reflects what he believes in his lifestyle, and he has been doing so for a long time.
And in this article called Jeremy Corbyn, The Green Britain I Want to Build, it says, as Labour leader, I would bring together a coalition of the majority to move on from wasteful, polluting, and unequal economic approach to our environment, and instead democratize our economy to reduce inequality and promote sustainable development within the Earth's resource limits. The campaign will prioritize our planet, and he has a list of what he wants to stand for, providing international leadership on climate change and socialization of our energy supply, leading an end to the era of fossil fuels, a modern green resource efficient economy, creating 1 million new climate jobs, ensuring everyone has access to decent home, low carbon and affordable to keep warm, putting people and the planet first, tackling the cost of living and climate crisis together, cleaner air, international approach, support internationally agreed universal standards of regulation of emissions and pollution. Lastly, a healthy, safe environment where people and nature thrive together. I mean, it's kind of, simple and basic, points he's making there.
And powerful ones too. And I'm glad that you quoted from that article. I think that is one of the most popular articles we've ever run on The Ecologist.
Right.
He really does set out a very positive vision there. And I think, that it is actually at the same time as it's quite simple, I think it also has a certain subtlety and a considerable depth. In terms of subtlety, for example, he has been criticised for simply wanting to go back to the 1980s or indeed the 1970s on an agenda of nationalisation and nationalised industries. But in fact, as you will realise from having read this is actually not what he's saying at all. He is saying that he wants to decentralise energy. He wants to break the power of the big six. He wants to break their monopoly. But that doesn't mean that he wants to take the whole thing into public ownership. He is looking at decentralised solutions, or much more autonomous and democratised local energy. And following much more the kind of model that has worked well in Germany and in Austria, with a much wider choice of cooperative energy, of municipal energy, which is also, in fact, something that I understand is taking place in the United States, in Oklahoma, which has a similar kind of structure of energy provision. And the result is that Oklahoma has some of the lowest cost power and some of the cleanest power in the entire United States. So he has his opponents that are trying to present him as being some kind of a wacky extremist, going back to, things that didn't work in terms of state-run nationalized industries, but in fact, that's not what he's talking about at all. He is very much in line with progressive ideas around the world, and these are really the kind of themes that he is drawing on. Yeah, I mean, it's great, and I just hope that he gets the chance to put it into effect.
I just can't help but just keep thinking about, I mean, things should be like this already. I mean, thinking of the environment and doing everything environmentally sound is, just such a no-brainer. And to be trying to go back to it and do things, in efficient and environmentally sound ways having that be seen as like some radical or extreme, position to take is just it shows like how far off course I think capitalism has taken the environment, for profit. Sure.
Yes, I mean, obviously it isn't just capitalism, it's also his political enemies and the media, the predominantly right-wing media that are doing this. The basic strategy seems to be to sort of brand him as an extremist. And I think that this is one important thing that he and his shadow ministers have achieved in this Labour Party conference, is really to shrug that off and present a very different image of themselves. So, for example, yesterday we had John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, effectively the Treasury Minister, who, far from going in and presenting himself as a radical firebrand, actually went in saying, think of me as your old-fashioned bank manager, and actually sounding and looking very reassuring, putting forward a message which was one of fiscal responsibility, but combined with a vision of a country that was free of the shackles of austerity, living within its means, but finding enough for everybody and making sure that those that bore the brunt of cuts were not the people that could shoulder them least and that were least responsible for the financial crisis.
Right.
And in fact coming over as being sort of really quite sensible and, if anything, making George Osborne, the current Chancellor of the Exchequer, look like the extremist by imposing what is actually an extremely radical neoliberal agenda of austerity, and one that hardly a serious economist in the entire world really has anything good to say for. And I suppose that this is why Corbyn's opponents and the opponents of his entire shadow cabinet are so desperate to label him as the extremist, is that in fact what his policies and the maturity and the good sense that underlies them is revealing is that the real extremist is the Conservative government that we have, and which is inflicting huge amounts of needless suffering on people, and poor people in particular, huge environmental damage, and all for no good reason.
Right, except they're filling their pockets.
Well, certainly, I think certainly some of them are filling their pockets, yes. And certainly people that have been financing the Conservative Party are indeed filling their pockets. You know, we have these profiteering big six energy companies which operate like a complex monopoly over the country's retail energy supplies. And it does seem that they pretty much tell the government what to do, right. Because pretty much all of the government's policies seem to be policies that put more money their way. And fossil fuel interests. You know, the current Conservative government does seem to be completely dominated by fossil fuel interests and by the nuclear interest.
So the UK
and all of these are things that are costing us very dear.
So the UK government has the same problem the US government has, or, you know, in that it's just been, it's not a government for the people anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually worse than the United States government in regard to energy, because Obama's energy policy, I would say, is certainly moderately bad. All of the above strategy. Arctic oil, fracking, tar sands, the trial drilling by Shell in the Arctic, which has been called off, but not on principle, but because they didn't find enough oil and gas there.
Thank God.
Nuclear power. You know, there is all that bad stuff, but at least within all of that bad stuff, you have got quite a strong renewable energy program. What's been going on here is we've got all of the bad stuff, and they've been cutting as hard as they can. They have been cutting away at renewable energy, removing all of the incentives, undermining the planning regime, causing a complete crisis of confidence among investors, and apparently doing their level best to destroy what was until recently a thriving renewable energy sector in the United Kingdom. It's complete madness.
Yes.
And one just wonders, you know, how on earth is this guy, you know, how on earth are these ministers going to be able to stand up in the Paris conference, COP21, this December, and actually sort of make a speech about all these wonderful things that they are doing, because what they are doing is almost uniquely destructive as far as progress on energy and reducing carbon emissions and climate is concerned.
You know, and not to mention what it's doing to the people. Like, you know, Corbyn, he did, you know, talk about all the refugees that the military-industrial complex is creating, you know, all over the Middle East.
Well, yes, and that, of course, is a topic which needs to be approached on multiple levels. There is an immediate humanitarian crisis. There is the fact that, as you say, the military-industrial complex has been turning the Middle East into a complete hellhole, creating failed states by outright military attack and also by covert attack, which has been more the case in Syria. But we have Iraq is pretty much a failed state, Syria is a failed state, Libya is a failed state, and these are all the countries that the United States and the United Kingdom and the Western Alliance have been in to mould to their will by military means, and all we've created is destruction and poverty and misery, and it is really the most appalling record. And yet these people have the gall to tell Jeremy Corbyn that he's risking the nation's security by trying to back off militarism, which is really the most extraordinary claim, because all of the evidence is that the threats to national security have come entirely from those that have been pursuing stupid and needless wars that have every single one of them backfired on us. Anyway, that is one level. You know, that is perhaps, you know, then the second level on which to approach this. But The third level is actually the environmental crisis that has been taking place over the Middle East and North Africa, with rapidly rising populations, unsustainable land use, climate change, and all needing enormous investment in water, soils, sustainable agriculture, clean energy, employment, and all of these things. And frankly, if only all of this money that we have been spending on wars had been spent on trying to build some kind of sustainable agricultural and energy systems in harmony with their societies, we might be somewhere.
And not just any job, not just, because I always, when they talk about jobs, jobs, employment, this is going to give people jobs. But I'm always like, well, what kind of a job? I mean, right, you want to give people a job that's going to do good for other people and the planet, not just a job that's just going to pay you money to be destructive.
Well, completely. But, you look at the Middle East and North Africa and just look at that renewable energy potential that you've got there. It's huge, and the possibilities for sustainable agriculture. Instead, we have a British government that is trying to essentially force industrial agriculture on Africa, with GMOs and synthetic fertilizers and pesticides and high inputs and hybrid seeds and all of that, when in fact one effect of this will be to throw people off the land. And what we desperately need is an agroecological approach that will sustain the soils, sustain the biodiversity, sustain traditional seed varieties, provide high quality nutrition, keep people on the land instead of kicking them off the land to flock into cities where they struggle to survive and have an appalling quality of life. But coming back to Corbyn, I think in his speech today, Corbyn was addressing these issues, and he was doing something that I don't think I've really heard any other Western politician do, which is to denounce Saudi Arabia and the Gulf Cooperation Council's attacks on Yemen, which is yet another one of these utterly cruel wars of destruction and misery, which is one in which the United States and the United Kingdom have no direct part, but to which we are giving political support in the United Nations and elsewhere. And you just think, here is the war. It's already killed over 5,000 people. It's like turning an entire country of 21 million into 21 million people into somewhere like Gaza, and using very much the same kind of military tactics that have been used against Gaza, of a mixture of sort of random bombing and targeted bombing and blockade, and yet the West has been almost entirely silent about it. And Corbyn actually stood up today and denounced that war, and thank God someone's doing it.
And at least Vladimir Putin here in New York at the UN, told Obama, I literally was like so happy. He's just said it directly that this country has to stop just the never-ending wars and this imperialistic, just addiction to dominance. I think he just called it like world dominance.
Well, of course, this is the project for a new American century, isn't it? That of establishing full spectrum dominance over the entire globe. And although, that is a project which was really developed under Republican administration, I think that Obama has seen his role to continue it completely seamlessly. And the interesting thing is that although America has established what one might indeed call full spectrum dominance in an awful lot of ways, yet the end result of it is failure.
Right.
The most notable feature of American interventions and American foreign policy is its abject failure. And this is why Putin has been able to go into Syria and establish his military base there and fly in his jets, is because American policy has really created a power vacuum in Syria with an enfeebled Syrian government putting up about the only serious opposition to Islamic State, not getting any help from anybody. We've had America and Britain and other countries, in spite of really the very deep existential threat posed to us all by ISIS. It seems from their statements that they are still much more worried about getting rid of Assad, who has no global imperial ambitions, and to use ISIS in order to try and get rid of him. Although quite clearly ISIS presents a much deeper and longer term existential threat. Assad remains their real enemy, it does appear. This is madness. And that policy has led to the failure of Syria. And it has left this vacuum of failure with the United States $500 million effort, really achieving nothing so much as the feeding of large quantities of sophisticated weapons to Islamic State. And into this, while the Americans are scratching their heads thinking, hang on, how did this happen? How did it all go wrong? What are we going to do now? Suddenly, Putin is in there on the ground doing stuff with his own agenda and actually showing every signs of being able to carry something through. So one does have to have respect for Putin and his decisiveness and effectiveness and his sense of timing to have carried this one off. And frankly, I wish him success, because everything we've tried to do has failed.
Yeah, Putin, he called U.S. politics unprofessional and not real, and also not good for the U.S. either. I mean, the reason why everything is turning into such a disaster, is because they're perpetuating it. I mean, it's a for-profit, fake war. So they're not even trying to resolve these problems.
Well, one can't help wondering sometimes if the point of all of this stuff isn't to stir up chaos. I mean, it's hard to see much rational motive for wanting to stir up chaos. It's just everywhere you look, that is the effect of it.
Exactly.
And I suppose that there are certain parties that do rather well off this chaos, like the people that produce weapons.
Right. Lockheed Martin.
And the various private security companies that are running increasingly large part of America's military operations. So perhaps, there are certain parties that really want to stir up chaos, and it may well be in their interests, but it's hard to see how this could ever be in the interests of America as a whole and the American people, this deliberate creation of global instability. Never before, you look at the huge challenges that we face, and among those you can certainly sort of number questions like, how do we feed the world? How do we tackle climate change? What do we do about water? And so on. And you just think, well, the absolute first step to be able to tackling any of these deep, serious, long-term problems, which are really existential challenges to humanity's long-term future on this planet, an absolutely first precondition has to be peace. Right. Some kind of a peaceful environment in which we can debate the solutions and put them into effect. But as long as you've got wars and chaos and instability and insecurity, it's very hard indeed to progress any of these.
And the fact
progressive agendas.
Yeah, the United States, they don't even get congressional approval. I mean, like they're literally breaking all of these laws. in initiating these. I mean, I don't even call them wars, because it's, it's not like it's a two-way street. It's, it's like one way, like Israel is with Gaza.
Yes, well, we have our British government trying to do the same kind of thing. David Cameron, our Prime Minister, recently ordered a drone attack in Syria on British nationals, which killed those concerned, and I believe a number of other people too that had nothing to do with it. And he has never published the legal basis on which he did that. There is no declaration of war on that country. A parliamentary vote took place a few years ago, which turned that option down of launching strikes on Syria. And this is now being challenged in court by our Green Member of Parliament, Caroline Lucas, and her colleague in the House of Lords, Jenny Jones. So, we have our Prime Minister trying to do the same thing, trying to exercise what used to be a right of kings and queens called the royal prerogative, which is the power to declare war without having to go to Parliament. And this is something that is also being challenged, and indeed Jeremy Corbyn has made some remarks. I don't know if they're going to be translated through into policy, but to actually bring an end to the royal prerogative, which essentially gives a Prime Minister the power to act in an unfettered manner without recourse to Parliament in these very important ways, such as declaration of war and conduct of war. So these battle lines are drawn in this country too.
Yeah, I wanted to just briefly mention. Yesterday there was this small action. I just do like local news, and I filmed this local action. It was called Occupy the Courts. Down in Lower Manhattan, where the big courthouses are at Foley Square, and a group was taking envelopes into where the grand jury meets, like people who have, been violated or had issues of rights violations, and to try to meet with the foreman of the grand jury. And the woman who was kind of running this group, this gathering of Occupy the Courts, was just telling me that most people, they just don't even know that they have the right to be doing this. When the people that were in this group went to go bring these envelopes to request an appointment to meet with the foreman of the grand jury, they were met with like all this hostility, for basically exercising what is within their right, and
their legal rights, yes.
I've really, like, for such a long time, always tried to, just tell people that, you need to exercise. You need to, exercise. I mean, like, most people in this country really, they don't know their rights. And, I'm just like, I'm trying to tie it into what we're talking about.
We have similar things going on here, in fact. And one of the things our current Conservative government has been doing is to curtail the ability of citizens and non-governmental organisations and so on to undertake a legal process called judicial review. And where this really comes in is where the government has acted unlawfully, but using their executive power. Now, there is a process called judicial review whereby you can go to court and you can file papers and you can challenge the government for having acted outside of the law. So either unlawfully or indeed illegally, or in certain cases irrationally. All of these things can be challenged via judicial review. But one of the things this government has been doing is curtailing the ability to undertake judicial review by limiting the circumstances in which you can do it, and by imposing heavier costs and by demanding larger sums of upfront money and by making a wider class of people liable for carrying legal costs in the event that it does not work. And this is really a rather chilling thing because, here is a right that we have, and frankly, who can really argue against there being a public right to challenge a government where it is acting unlawfully? Well, that is what they have been doing. Right. And
that's,
if you live in a democratic society, one of the fundamental ways in which rights can be maintained is through the law and through the impartiality of the law and the availability of the law and the supremacy of the law over executive power. And it is a very worrying thing to be able to have executive power taking precedence over law. And in fact, it is the kind of thing that is really symptomatic of an authoritarian society, along the lines of China, perhaps, is a country where I would not expect there to be free access to the law to hold governments to account. Now, that is one of our fundamental freedoms here in Britain, or it has been, but that freedom is now being eaten away at. And I think a lot of people haven't realised how serious it is.
Exactly.
And it is interesting to know that in the United States that people are also standing up for their legal rights. Because frankly, once we've lost those rights,
right.
How do you get them back? How do you get those back once they are gone?
I think that is an environmental, disaster. Is right, like people not knowing their rights. The system, in this country, keeping people dumbed down. Like, most people don't think of that as an environmental crisis, but I do. I consider your health, physically, mentally and spiritually, like, that's being, deteriorating. That is an environmental crisis. It's like a social environmental crisis.
Well, yes, and certainly law is one of the main tools for the defence of the environment. And one certainly very good thing as far as the United Kingdom is concerned, being a member of the European Union, is that we are subject to quite strong environmental laws coming out of the EU. And it isn't always easy to make sure that those laws are applied, but those laws do exist, and we do have the right of going to court and of filing complaints with the European Commission and even filing actions at the European Court of Justice, and these are essential rights for the defence of human health, for the defence of environment, for the defence of human rights. Because, as you say, human rights and environmental justice are intimately connected.
Right.
If you live in some third world country without a proper legal structure, without an effective legal system, you can be polluted. You can have your land seized, your forests can be cut down, and there is nothing that you can do about it because there is no authority prepared to stand up for you. And so really all of our rights as far as health and environment and all of these things are concerned do actually come down to having proper structures of government and justice which are effective and accessible and fair.
See, that's what people don't realize, is that their relationship to their government and their legislature needs to be maintained just like any other relationship. And the people really do need to stay involved. It's just, I just always think of it as just like a large kind of dysfunctional like family or relationship.
There is an awful lot of that, and I think that this is one thing, once again, that Corbyn looks like changing, because the Labour Party is now, with Corbyn at its helm, the Labour Party is hugely energised. It has had a massive influx of members. I think over 160,000 members have just recently joined. Many of them politically active and really wanting to be a lot more politically active. Now, they are coming into a Labour Party which has become rather small, comfortable, not radical at all. But all of these Labour Party meetings and local political organisations are finding they have got this influx of politically committed and engaged people who are looking for change and who want to see that change that they now have at the top, with Jeremy Corbyn as leader, being reflected right through the entire structure of the Labour Party, the different executive and policy-making committees, the local parties, and that will, I think, be quite instrumental in rebuilding the links between members of Parliament and the communities that they are there to serve.
Right. I wanted to refer to the article on the ecologist that you wrote, called "Victory Corbyn's Political Earthquake Will Resound Long and Deep." And I made a couple of notes. Yeah, you talk about David Cameron has good reason to fear the coming of Corbyn.
Now, this was, of course, written before the first Prime Minister's questions took place. And I have to say that I was wondering what was going to happen, what form this encounter would take. And Corbyn actually played it, I think, extremely cleverly, because what he had done is he had been doing a sort of crowdsourcing of questions.
He must have read your article.
I think he went rather beyond anything I was thinking of, to be honest. But because he did a sort of crowdsourcing of questions, and he went in with a very, sort of really quite a sort of calm and gentle approach, and saying that he had had this crowdsourcing exercise and that here were some of the questions that had come up. And Prime Minister's question time, as you know, is generally characterised by a right old sort of political ding-dong. It's highly rhetorical. No one really answers any question that is put. And it's really just a point-scoring exercise. But by putting questions that came from ordinary members of the public, it really put Cameron on the spot in a different way. These were questions that he had to answer, and he couldn't just throw them back in Jeremy Corbyn's face, as he would normally do in the sort of Punch and Judy show of British politics, because actually that would have been disrespectful, not to Corbyn. It's perfectly fine to be disrespectful to your opposition, but what no politician can afford to be is disrespectful to the electorate. And these were questions that had come into Corbyn from his electorate, and that he was passing on. And so that really had Cameron completely cornered and really left with no alternative but to try and answer these questions and do so in a civil and mature fashion. So it was, to me, a completely unexpected move, but it was one that put Cameron into a different place, and one in which he was much less sure on his feet than he would have been with his more classic sort of ding-dong debating style that he has been used to, and which I have to say Cameron's extremely good at. and has probably managed to avoid ever actually having to answer a single question until Corbyn came along and forced him to.
Right. I mean, yeah, we even in this country could use someone like Corbyn, like, to just cut right through the BS.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, that's what he's been doing.
You know, I mean, like we have to, like we were just talking about the environment and health and, you know, feeding people, you know, healthy food and things like that. So again, you know, we need healthy leaders. I mean, people that are going to just be like, you know, refreshing and, you know, nutritious.
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, on those fronts, of course, you know, these particular cudgels have been taken up by his shadow ministers, and he has two, I think, very effective shadow ministers for environment, food and rural affairs, where it's Kerry McCarthy, who is really tackling the Conservative agenda head on numerous fronts, from the highly unpopular badger cull to fox hunting to the quality of food, and we also have Lisa Nandy, another very important woman in the shadow cabinet, who is tackling these all-important questions of energy and climate change. And who is putting forward a fresh agenda, which is the complete opposite of the Conservative agenda, and which also differs quite substantially from the one that we had before, through, for example, its outright opposition to nuclear power. And this has to be very welcome, because up until now, Labour has been very equivocal on nuclear power, but they are now coming out and saying it loud and clear that this proposed deal on a new power station in Somerset at Hinkley C is a terrible deal, and one that is taking the country nowhere except very expensive electricity and nuclear power and nuclear waste that we don't know what to do with, and that our future is green and renewable. And so it is not just Corbyn now. You know, it is the people around him, his loyal ministers, the wider Labour Party, which I think has been very much won over during this conference, and the Labour Party membership, which has grown so enormously, with a sort of movement of hundreds of thousands of people that are determined to make this happen. And so we now see the development of a powerful political momentum which has got 5 years in which to grow, develop, mature, and work itself up into an unbeatable political force in 5 years' time to defeat the Conservatives and create a whole new British politics and a whole new style of government for the 21st century.
Well, I pray, you know, I hope that happens for you guys over there in the UK, and I hope it happens for us over here too.
Well, a lot of people are determined to make it happen, and that's what counts. You know, it is not, well, Jeremy Corbyn is a wonderful leader. He's a great guy. He is inspiring this movement, but it'll take a lot more than him to make it happen.
Exactly.
It will need the popular support, you know, of millions of people around the country who believe in what he's saying, and who feel that he is enunciating a vision of the kind of Britain that they want to live in and that they want their children to grow up into. And that is what is going to make it happen and make this a movement that is not just you know for now or for 5 years, but a long-term enduring force for the future.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you so much, Oliver Tickell of The Ecologist in the UK, for joining me on this Organic News on Awake Radio.
Thank you.
Pleasure, and I hope to speak with you again.
I'll look forward to that.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.